So for this story lab, friends, I would like you to create a picture at the end of the story of the characters in the story, okay? The biggest pumpkin ever. Once there were two mice who fell in love with the same pumpkin. Clayton, the house mouse, noticed it one day at the vegetable garden. It was still little and green, but Clayton thought he could make it grow really big. Desmond, the field mouse, discovered the pumpkin the same day. He thought that if he helped it grow, it could become the biggest jack-o'-lantern in the neighborhood. That afternoon, Clayton watered the pumpkin. He also mixed up some fertilizer and water. He spread the mixture around the pumpkin to make it grow larger. That very same night, Desmond went into the garden. He watered the pumpkin too. He also put some fertilizer in the water. The next day, Clayton watered and fertilized the pumpkin again. The next night, Desmond did the same, and the pumpkin began to grow. By the end of the month, the pumpkin was so large, Clayton couldn't believe his eyes. And remember, we're thinking about the characters in this story. "My goodness," said Clayton's mother, "and it's not even full grown. All I do is water it." If you want the pumpkin to grow bigger faster, you should use sugar water. That night, Desmond brought his mother Morris to see the pumpkin. "That is some pumpkin. All I do is water it. You should try using sugar water." The next day, Clayton dug a small hole beside the pumpkin vine, and in the hole, he placed a bowl full of sugar water. That night, Desmond did the same. Within a week, the pumpkin was twice the size it had been. Within 2 weeks, it was absolutely enormous. Clayton was amazed. He ran down the road and picked into his friend Jimmy's pumpkin patch. The pumpkins were still small there. That night, Desmond and his brother spent a long time looking at the pumpkin. How do you think it got so big? A week later, Clayton noticed the pumpkin was bigger than the family car. During the day, everyone he knew he came to admire it. And at night, all the field mice gathered round to do the same. By now, summer was almost over. That night, the weather grew colder. Thinking there might be an early frost, Clayton rushed out to the pumpkin with his blanket. One wasn't enough. As he worked, he hummed a little song, and as he hummed, he heard someone else singing. He also began to realize that someone else was covering the pumpkin with blankets. Desmond, too, had seen the danger of an early frost. He, too, had brought blankets for the pumpkin, and as he worked, he sang a little song. Clayton stopped humming, he put down his pile of blankets, and peeked to see at the corner of the pumpkin. Desmond stopped singing, too. The two of them bumped heads and fell down. "You've been feeding the pumpkin, and you've been feeding the pumpkin," said Desmond. "That's why it got so big." When everything had been explained, Clayton said, "I know I'll win the contest if I can get the pumpkin to town." "Let's do it together." "It's a deal," said Clayton. "A deal," said Desmond. The morning of the contest was bright and sunny. Mice were bringing their pumpkins to the town square by truck and car and wagon. Some were rolling them along the ground. Suddenly, they all stopped short. Over the fields came the biggest pumpkin anyone had ever seen. It was being pulled by 100 field mice on motorcycles. When the pumpkins reached town, it was too big for any of the streets. Clayton had to explain why they couldn't bring it to the square. The mayor understood at once. He led the crowd to the giant pumpkin. "Who had believed this? Who would have believed this?" said Desmond at the same moment. When the celebration was over, the 100 field mice pulled the pumpkin back to the field. The day before Halloween, they carved it into the best jack-o'-lantern ever. And on Halloween night, its wonderful, smiling face could be seen glowing for miles around. All right, now think about the characters of the story. If you're coming to school on Thursday, please bring me that picture. And if you're not coming to school and you're learning from home, you can snap a picture and send it to Dojo Messages. Have fun.